recorded, and we will post a copy of the webinar recording on ACCE's online university. This means that you'll be able to revisit any portion of today's conversation and even share a copy of the presentation with your peers. Also, if you take a look at the right-hand corner of your screen in the handout pane of your GoToWebinar toolbar, you will see that you can download a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation. And as I have you looking at your toolbar, I will draw your attention to a useful question pane that you can utilize to submit questions for our speakers to address during their presentations. Our goal is to make today's presentation highly interactive. Therefore, we encourage each of you to enter your unique audio PIN, which you will find listed in the toolbar as well, into your phone now. This will grant you audio access to the line, and while you are all currently in listen-only mode, we can unmute you if you submit a question or raise your hand to submit a question for one of our speakers during the various Q&A portions of this webinar. If you should utilize the audio feature, however, we just ask that you please do not place us on hold at any time during the webinar, as it can cause hold music disruptions during the presentation. So now, as you know, we have invited 3 fabulous guest speakers who will share how Chambers of Commerce can leverage the new Every Student Succeeds Act to promote career readiness into their state's new accountability plans and improve education attainment and workforce outcomes. These speakers include Christopher Scheer, who is the Program Officer in Education at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, Liz Smith, who is the Director of Policy and Research at the Baton Rouge Area Chamber, and David Rattray, who is the Executive Vice President of Education and Workforce Development at the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. We thought what might be helpful to do is to structure today's conversation by providing you all with an overview of the opportunity that the Every Student Succeeds Act planning process provides states to innovate and align their education systems with meaningful college, career, and civic readiness goals, along with an overview of the ESSA implementation timeline, and then lead you into 2 case study examples of how chambers have engaged in this work. However, we want to make sure that we answer the most pressing questions you all have regarding this new law. Therefore, before we structured the agenda, we outreached to a handful of you that registered for the webinar today to learn a little bit more about what you'd like to gain from the conversation. On the slide in front of you, you will see what we've heard from our members and summarized what you shared with us into 4 main points. So these 4 main points, as you see, are how chambers are working with state leaders on their state's new accountability plan, what impact the Every Student Succeeds Act has at the local level, how to define and promote career readiness, and what other chambers are doing in their community to support the development of their state's ESSA plan. So now I'm going to pause for just a few minutes and ask that if there's anything else you would like to learn about, that you please share that with me now. And again, we can go ahead and unmute you if you raise your hand, or you can go ahead and submit a question into the question section of your toolbar. So Megan, I see that you've raised your hand. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now. Can you hear us? Go ahead, Megan.
Oh, no, I didn't raise my hand.
Is there anything else you'd like us to cover during today's webinar? Any main points you'd like us to touch upon? All right, so if we don't have any other questions, please just feel free to submit your questions as you hear our speakers present, and we can address them throughout the webinar. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Chris Scheer, who, as I mentioned, is a program officer in education at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. He manages grants to improve education by advancing deeper learning, knowledge, skills, and dispositions for students, and is a key thought leader and partner in this work. Chris, I'll now hand over this presentation to you.
Great. Thank you very much. And thanks, everyone, for having me on this webinar. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation is extremely interested in promoting the mix of knowledge, academic content knowledge, higher order thinking skills, and learning dispositions that we think kids need to get in school that prepare them for the workforce, and not just for getting the first job, but in keeping and having an interesting career. And we think that our central supposition is that by just focusing on basic math and reading over the past 10 or 15 years, the U.S. is under-preparing and under-advantaging the 13 years we have with kids in K-12 and the 2 years we might have with them in community college or 4 years in college, for them to be ready to be effective in the workforce in the 21st century economy, the global economy. And that you, as chamber staff and knowing your communities, that the community feels that pain, that they're getting new employees who aren't ready to succeed. And our bet is that K-12 education reform can put us in a better position to do that. So I'm going to talk for about up to 10 minutes or so, and I want to run you through what we think current education policy might mean for changing that situation. As you guys may know, the No Child Left Behind Act was recently reauthorized as the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is known as ESSA, and it replaces NCLB, and its biggest hallmark is that it swings the pendulum of control from inside the Beltway back out to the states, and gives them an opportunity to innovate and to work better between the state and the districts and the schools to promote better attainment. In addition, we're hoping better equity and stronger accountability for career pathways. So it creates an opportunity, I think, for you guys as a community to engage with the state as they develop their plans. Another hallmark of this plan is that instead of people submitting to the federal government for approval of category by category by category educational programming, it requires what's called a consolidated plan, which is the state has to set a North Star, and that North Star then has to thread through all the individual various siloed categorical programs that the states do. This gives us a great opportunity to elevate college and career readiness as the same skill set, essentially a post-secondary skill set, and try and get states to articulate that back to their frames as opposed to having old-style CTE as the orphan of the educational program. So on the next slide, you will see the timeline of how this is going to come about. So last year, ESSA passed in December, the president signed it into law in January, and the department went in, the bureaucrats went into their rulemaking, the development of regulations. And those regulations, even as we speak, are at the Office of Management and Budget and will probably be finalized and released this year in November. And as you may or may not know, the law has the power of the law, but the regulations that the Department of Education puts out in terms of how to interpret the law also has the force of law. So this is a very high stakes time period where the Department of Ed is essentially determining what will happen. Then states are going to have an opportunity over the December to March or summer of next year period to develop and submit their plans. And this is the time period in which we think that chambers can engage with states and ask them some powerful questions about whether or not they're serious about career readiness, whether or not the academic readiness indicators that they have are useful for the skills and knowledge that kids are going to have in the workforce, because we might all be going to college, but after college, we're all going to get a job. So we think that these things are very interrelated. And then in the 16-17 school year, they'll be doing these plans in the 17-18 school year. they're supposed to take effect. But we do think that the government might push the deadline out, essentially giving states a first year of no stakes implementation, and then only in the 18-19 school year would implementation of these plans count for whether or not states are penalized or have to report and intervene with low-performing schools. So if you take a look at the next slide, what is the kind of major differences that we think No Child Left Behind and ESSA have? So No Child Left Behind set pretty unrealistic goals and targets, and the mathematics that were used to judge whether or not a state had made progress on No Child Left Behind was a kind of mathematical impossibility. If you got kids out of low-performing status and into high-performing status, they no longer counted in your system, and you were stuck with an increasingly concentrated group of kids that were being underachieving, and states were then designated as underachieving schools, and the whole thing got into a kind of death spiral. Plus, there were really high incentives to teach to the tests, and the tests really only measured low-level, multiple-choice indicators of math and reading, and it didn't make room for the kind of stuff that we think of in terms of both college and career readiness. And ESSA opens up a path for people to move to more innovative work. I think to some extent, and David's really increasingly just a national voice on this issue, that to some extent the education system thought it was aping the employment system. It thought it was doing what businesses and employers wanted, that it was setting really tough measures, it was using data against those measures, and it was firing the bottom 5% to get ahead. That's not really how successful businesses work, and I think we have a real opportunity to convey to state education organizations that it's about identification for strength. It's about data for continuous improvement. It's about ramping up the capacity of your teams. It's about getting your teams to work across their silos, and not so much a kind of old school notion that you fix the stock price and fire the people who aren't contributing the most to it. And there are various now opportunities for new locally tailored strategies, multiple measures of student success, multiple indicators in accountability beyond just these math and reading scores. The pendulum swing does bring with it, though, a risk, and this is a risk that I hope you guys will help your states pay attention to, which is, as Arnie Duncan used to say, under No Child Left Behind, the government was very loose about, the government had been very loose about what you did. And so they kind of cared about, they didn't really care about what you were after, but they cared a lot about how you were after it. And he characterized that as a kind of loose, tight system. And he wanted to replace it with interim waivers for states that was sort of what he called tight-loose. It was tight on goals, but loose on your pathway to get there. I think we're entering a system now that might be loose-loose, that states are loose about their goals and loose about their pathways to getting to those goals. And I think that you and your constituents can make a really big difference in helping them be tight on what they're after for kids, and you can influence their thinking about that, and tight on the kinds of interventions and supports kids would get, like strong internships and business experiences. So if you go to the next slide, back in No Child Left Behind, what we really had was a school accountability system that was based on annual performance in state tests, and that has expanded. So Anna, we may need to go to the next slide here because it's still showing the NCLB versus ESSA comparison. Now there's going to be more of multiple measures. I think it gives us in the community much more room to operate. Yes, you're going to be tested on math and reading. Yes, you're going to be tested on science. But they've added in the question of whether the new face of America, the English language learners, are going to be in a position to be brought up to speed, truly engaged, strengthened. It's really talking about the value of high school graduation rates and whether or not that means you're ready. And that's going to be strengthened. Then there's this also notion of not just snapshot achievement, but whether or not students are growing over time, getting better even if they started out at a low level. This is in the elementary and middle schools. And in high school, they're allowing what's so-called fifth indicator, that the state can pick another quality for school or student success. And here I think the risk is that states are going to just interpret that as something like suspension rates for kids, or a measure of school engagement. How much do teachers like working there, students like working there? But we can get them to think about a 6th indicator and a 7th indicator and an 8th indicator. So that if there are many things that they are after and many measures of those things, can we have an accountability system that holds schools accountable and responsible for doing many things and not just a couple of things? And those things can be career readiness kinds of processes. So if you go to the next slide, what we really think is you could advocate without being, or your staff being, true, deep policy wonks and education experts. You could go to states and say, look, are your kids, do they have access to work-based learning? Are they participating in work-based learning? Have you and your bureaucracy really engaged in the aligning of workforce credentials, industry certificates to your academic goals? Are kids headed into and completing a pathway or a modern CTE sequence? Measurement of communication, collaboration, self-startingness, persistence, the kinds of what are called social or emotional learning skills that we know are incredibly important to success in the workforce. Are they doing performance-based things and not just tests? I mean, when was the last time one of your employers decided to advance or retain people based on some multiple choice test, right? So there are a whole range, and EAD and funders like us and our other grantees can support you in coming up with recommendations for these richer indicators that you could recommend. So if we go to the next slide, I think a really great way for you to engage states is to say to them, do you have a vision in your plan? We know that you're not just reporting on categorical programs. We know that you're reporting on a consolidated state plan. That plan ought to have a vision. That vision ought to include college and career readiness, not college or career readiness. And I think you can talk to them about that. And you've got groups like the LA Chamber, ACCE, the Education Achievement Division work, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Council of Chief State School Officers, the people designing Perkins, really ready to work for you on this. And here's an example of this. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce just came out with a really great conceptual framework you ought to familiarize yourself with. It's a great report they've just done. It basically lays out what is college readiness. Traditionally, that's been a pretty small group of things, and career readiness can be a richer group of things, a broader lens for kids. And when you combine them together, in the far right-hand column, they become an extremely powerful combined vision for what kids can do that have various components. And in each of those components, you can think about a vision, you can think about measuring it, you can think about holding schools accountable for it. So my last slide, I'm running just a little bit over here, I apologize, is what else could you do? I think that you guys cannot just go in and advocate for this kind of a vision, but you guys are great, you have great convening power. You can hold stakeholder meetings, you can support people and connect them to having a richer plan. You can provide access to indicators or the kinds of programs you and your members support for externships, internships, guest speaking, those kinds of things. And you can ask them from their perspective what else you could do to help make this new pivot in federal and state law something that we could take real advantage of for the agenda that I think we all have in common. So I want to thank you for that time. Sorry to run a couple minutes over.
No, thank you for that fabulous overview, Chris. So now we're just going to pause for just a moment and take any questions that you have for Chris. You're welcome to share any reflections that you have about this work or share comments about what you're doing within your community and state if you'd like. And
well,
oh, go ahead.
This is David Rattray. While some of you are thinking about some questions that might be in your mind formulating, I'll ask Chris one question. Chris, to your experience, I know you work with state-level leadership like superintendents or commissioners. Do they want the business community at the table? Are they inviting? You know, how do they react to us when we say, hey, we want to be part of something like this?
David, it's a great question. I think there are some places like Kentucky that have the Pritchard Committee and their chambers and a long-standing relationship. They're incredibly interested in what the employment sector has to say. They've developed model programs where kids are tested not just on the state test of academic stuff, but they have a whole tests around career opportunity capacity. There are some people who I think don't necessarily want the business sector monkeying around with their goals and may not be as responsive. I think the majority are in the middle, where ESSA right now is asking them to engage their communities in a rich discussion about what the plan ought to look like. And some of them may just simply be overlooking the business community in terms of who they're reaching out to. They're probably a little more worried about their civil rights communities, about their parents who are trying to opt out of tests, and they may be overlooking the resources that the chambers and others have for them. And so I think that they would, they might be a little surprised, but would welcome the phone call.
So Chris, one other question related to that is, I know for a lot of our chamber colleagues, it's a little intimidating. This looks so technical, education jargon stuff. So sometimes we would hesitate to think that we don't know enough to actually show up, and have a voice. Do we need to be, sort of technically super sophisticated, or just showing up and giving some of the basic perspective of the business community, does that make a difference?
I think it's a good question. It makes a huge difference. Obviously, if you have a big enough chamber to afford a sophisticated, deep staff who used to work in the legislature, used to work on Capitol Hill, used to work in the state education agency, you're at more of an advantage to get into granular level and shape the direction of these policies. But anyone, just by asking, look, do you have a big vision? Does that vision include our children's readiness for workforce? Do you have a vision? If you do you have any measures of that vision? Do you have any measures of career and technical readiness? Do you have any business partnerships? Do you have questions for us? Do you need our resources? Do you want us to connect you to the LA Chamber or the US Chamber or any of the resources that employers have? I think you don't need to be a content expert to ask common sense questions about whether or not people are taking this new latitude they have at the state level to drive us back into only college readiness or college and career readiness, and whether or not people recognize that it's the same skill set for college and career readiness. So I think if you come with that message, at the very least, David, what you can do is avoid the re-siloing of education into one separate old school CTE silo over here and one maybe more interesting, more technologically fueled, more engaging college thing over there. So short form, I don't think you need to be an expert at all. I do think you want to do a little bit of homework and come in with some perspective and questions for your state.
And that's it. Great advice. Thank you, Chris. Hannah Horn, I see that you have just submitted a comment for the participants on the line. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You are welcome to share your comment now, if you'd like.
First of all, hi Liz, hi everybody. Good afternoon from Hilton Head Island, Bluffton Chamber of Commerce. Just wanted to mention our Business Education Partnership Committee is actually meeting the second week of December to take a look at our state's framework that is on its Department of Education website, and it has actually provided a feedback form for both parents and the private sector to answer 16 open-ended questions, everything from measures of success, different things we would like to see incorporated into the classroom and curriculum, as well as even asking how we would define teacher and student success. So we look forward to having that conversation, and our Department of Education is so excited that our chamber and chambers are getting involved, and I was so glad that they put up the exact questions that they wanted the feedback on.
That's fabulous. What a wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Hannah. I'm going to go ahead and put you back on mute. And then, Derek, I see that you've raised your hand. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. This is Derek. I'm with the North Orange County Chamber of Commerce in Fullerton, California. One of the things our business community has been talking with us about lately is their desire to engage in these issues and engage with our local educators. So our chamber has recently partnered with the Orange County Department of Education, and they kind of welcomed us with open arms and saying, you are what we have been lacking in making these decisions and in creating these efforts and these programs and in prepping our schools for this. So, you know, being a chamber for about 8 cities in the North Orange County community, it's exciting to see that our Department of Education for the county has recognized that chambers are a great resource and can be great advocates for our business community, our teachers, our students, etc., and can kind of help frame the direction that all of this can go. So it's been pretty exciting, and the reception from the education community has been exciting as well.
Well, thank you, Derek, and thank you, Hannah and David, for your comments. We'll now hand it over to our next speaker, who is Liz Smith. She is the Policy and Research Director for the Baton Rouge Area Chamber. She serves as the organization's staff lead for regional and state-level public policy research and reform efforts in the areas of public education and workforce development. Liz is going to share how her chamber has been working to promote career readiness. And Liz, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Anna, and thanks everybody for being here. Thank you for having me. So I think that Chris's discussion really put me in a good place to be able to kind of bring it down to the local level, the regional level, and explain how you can really implement some of these activities. So I want to give you sort of a foundation to talk about where we are here in Louisiana. I think, you know, frankly, I'm really lucky to be doing career readiness work in Louisiana because we have leadership at the state superintendent level to include career readiness as something that is just as valued as academic readiness. So we have something called the Louisiana Jumpstart program. That is our statewide initiative for career and technical education, and it went into effect in 2014 with this 4-year implementation timeline. So we're in year 3 right now. And originally what this was created to do was really address the misalignment between our career and technical education offerings and the existing regional economic needs and projections, right? So you're seeing kids who were coming out of school, they were earning what we have here in Louisiana is a career diploma, and they were skilled at creating birdhouses or Microsoft Office, right, which is not helping them to get a job once they graduate, and it's certainly not preparing them for any sort of post-secondary education. And I think families recognized that at the time, you know, so only 2% of students were actually pursuing this career diploma. In the 3 years that we've been implementing Jumpstart, we've seen that usage jump up to 12%. This year is the first year that Jumpstart accountability is going to be part of our statewide accountability, so I think that 12% is going to go up hugely. But what they did was set up a system under which our Department of Education no longer vets industry-based credentials. Instead, it's done by our statewide workforce investment council, and I think that's really important, right? They asked business to come to the table, and so we now have 47 industry-based credentials that have been vetted and approved by industry, and they require, there are pathways, they require that students actually earn a, in most cases, nationally recognized credential that is aligned to regional workforce need. So our state puts together projections and they rank jobs on a star system. 4 stars means the best, 1 star means the least, and it's based on potential growth and also wages. And so these 47 approved industry-based credentials are 4- and 5-star job alignment, which is really great. We also have this sort of best-in-class accountability formula, and that's something that I definitely recommend that you advocate for in terms of accountability, right? And it's something that Chris brought up. In Louisiana, we include some career readiness metrics in our accountability that came with the changes to Jumpstart. So first, all of our kids take the ACT. All of our 11th graders take the ACT. Students can also take the ACT Work Keys test, and if their Work Keys score is higher than their ACT score, then that can sub in for their accountability score. So that's a motivator for schools to really get kids prepared for a career. And then on top of that, we have a graduation index for colleges. And so what that includes is these industry-based credentials. What we have done is created a system wherein a strength of diploma for a kid who gets a career diploma and an industry-based credential is worth the same amount of accountability points as a kid who graduates with a college preparatory diploma and has passed an AP test with a 3 or above. So we, for the first time in Louisiana, have equated career readiness in accountability with the same value as academic readiness, and that's hugely important. The Jumpstart program also really requires employer engagement. And so like I said, that started at the top with the Workforce Investment Council. But then Jumpstart also required that there are regional teams. So where the region breaks up, really according to our economic development regions, where our regions break up, we are required to have a team that is the public education system, so your county public education systems, here we call them parishes, your community colleges, economic development organizations, and then business and industry. And those teams were able to add additional industry-based credential pathways. They just had to prove that there was a regional need for it. They were able to provide the public education systems that they were working with information about the skills that students really need in order to be able to come out with that industry-based credential, but with the required skills to make them productive in the workforce. They've changed the way that setup is happening a little bit. Rather than doing regional teams for employer engagement, we're using our regional workforce development boards. It's being piloted right now, and the hope is that you can drive even more employer engagement that way. But either way, what's really important is that business comes to the table, and that's where you folks come in. And so I wanted to share, just to wrap up, some of the stuff that the Baton Rouge Area Chamber specifically has been doing in our region to support both career readiness and work-based learning. So first, we act as the Jumpstart Coordinator for our region. And so what that means is we come to the table with data about where the jobs are, where they're going to be growing, and the kinds of skills that employers need. We also have created something called the Virtual Schoolhouse, and this is part of our partnership with the state. The state wants to have a goal in place that is based on micro-industry engagement, where every single kid has access to an unfamiliar business mentor in any kind of industry that they could possibly want to pursue. And so we've created this thing called the Virtual Schoolhouse that allows students to use an online platform to connect with business people in our region. So we have created this portal, we've provided licenses for teachers, and we're actively out there recruiting business and industry in our target growth regions to sign on to this portal. And really what they do is they come in and they do like a Skype session, either as a guest speaker or a project panelist, as a mentor, whatever it happens to be. But the point is that you're getting business people and students together to talk about those kids' future. We've also worked with the state to develop what we call the Microenterprise Credential, and this Microenterprise Credential is one of those 47 approved industry-based credentials, and it prepares students for small business ownership and employment. And so again, we brought our small business council. I'm sure many of you have small business councils at your chamber. We brought our small business council to the table and worked with them and the Department of Education to develop an industry-based credential that's going to prepare kids for entrepreneurialism. It's specifically meant to sort of solve that problem where you have students who are interested in a field that is not necessarily a target industry. If they want to maybe go into cosmetology or something like that, where there's opportunities, but it's not a target industry. This gives those kids that sort of extra backing to say, okay, well, you've got this technical skill now. Here's the information that you need to really operationalize it and turn it into something where you can maybe make some money and move forward in the workplace. And then finally, we just try to advocate to the Department of Education, and we did this recently through a public policy commentary specifically on ESSA, saying that we want the state to include meaningful workplace experiences in the accountability formula for ESSA. And so what we mean by that is, we've already got all of these great career readiness metrics in our accountability formula. But it would be wonderful if we could add under that fifth indicator of school quality. Under that 5th indicator of school quality, we would like to see participation in work-based learning experiences, so that kids are actually getting into the workplace and they're having an opportunity to learn those soft skills and characteristics that our chamber members at least report to us every year that they have trouble finding in the workforce. And we recommend doing that in several ways. We say, there's a gold standard of an in-person internship, but certainly in communities that are rural, we understand that a virtual experience can sub in for this. Mainly what it's about is outcomes, not inputs. We want to make sure that that 5th indicator is about outcomes, not inputs. I can't stress that enough. And so with work-based learning, what we would see as outcome is not only participation, but supervisor assessments of soft skills and characteristics that are learned. So we put out that public policy commentary in early September, and we've got some really good feedback from the state on it, and I think that that's helping to drive their goal for that micro-industry engagement that I talked about before. So I think that's it for me.
Well, thank you, Liz. Thank you for sharing about your chamber's work. Does anybody have any questions for Liz that they would like to raise? You could submit a question by typing your question into the questions pane in your toolbar, or you can simply raise your hand and I can go ahead and unmute you. So we're just going to pause for a quick minute here.
So Liz, first of all, this is David Rattray. Great work, by the way. I'm so impressed.
Thank you.
The work-based learning piece you're advocating for, are you getting traction on getting that into your state-level system?
I would love to say yes, but I think the answer is no. So here in Louisiana, and this probably would be no surprise to anybody, I think our ESSA review is going to focus more on higher standards and greater academic achievement. I think that we're going to potentially have a goal for work-based learning, but I don't know that it's going to be included in the accountability formula.
Thank you, Liz. Anybody else have any questions for Liz? If not, we'll go ahead and move on to our next speaker, and you will have opportunities at the end of the webinar to pose additional questions. So now it is my pleasure to reintroduce David Rattray. As you know, he's the Executive Vice President of Education and Workforce Development at the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. He has been leading the Chamber's education and workforce development programs and initiatives since 1998, and will be sharing how the LA Area Chamber has been working to support the development of California's new accountability plan.
Thanks, Anna, and thank you again to all of you for joining today. I would encourage you to keep thinking about comments or questions. We want to, a lot of you said you want to know what each other's doing, so I'd love it if, as I'm going through this, if any of you can just share, like, what are you doing or what do you want to do, what do you want, what do you think you should do you want help with, as I'm walking through some of the stuff that we're up to, so that we can kind of just continue to respond to sharing with each other. So let me give you a couple notions about kind of how we were approaching this. I would sort of say, first of all, start off with a theme. You know, I kind of always use the theme, too much of a good thing can become a bad thing. And by that I mean, we all know that accountability is important. We all know that competition can spur innovation. But if you do something like that out of proportion or in too great of an extreme, you may get an unintended effect that's actually worse than the cure. And I think that's what one of the things we're really focused on is we almost overplayed the accountability card, or at least the way we played it, as Chris said, with multiple choice tests on 2 subjects, where we thought, the business community, we were getting accountability, but we actually got a lot of times a response in a translation into education policy and practice that undermined the very goal that we were all after, students actually learning better, staying in school, being engaged, and being successful, and then coming to our companies. So one of the roles that we've played, like many of you, is advocating at a federal level, advocating for the reauthorization of what's now known as ESSA, and advocating for really states to have greater flexibility to figure out what's best for their students and their economies and their state. So you see an example of a letter that we wrote a couple months ago, and I don't know how well it can actually be read on the screen, but I know we are making this letter available to everybody. And I hope that if you look at the paragraphs, you'll see, I think, a more nuanced argument that the business community gets that accountability is important. We also get that it's important to have a great place to work, that teachers and professionals want to be there and be in the classroom and being given some latitude to figure out what's best for their kids. So you'll see sort of a series of arguments that we're making along those lines. So one whole bucket of our work in ESSA is advocacy and advice. So this is an example at the national level with the Congress or the executive branch. Of course, we will also have appropriations battles ahead of us in terms of how much money is made available for the federal contribution to education. So that will happen every year, and always does. So that's another role that we would play in terms of advocating for resources. The next thing we do is advocate a lot at a state level. So one of the things that we've done in California is work closely with our key leadership. We have a state superintendent that's directly elected by the people. So I've co-chaired his transition task force and has just been his chief advisor. And we've literally organized a number of task forces and efforts to shape California's overall educational policy. So in that case, it's just working like a lot of you do directly with elected state leadership or appointed state leadership. We work with the governor's staff. In our state, the governor appoints members of a state school board and the chair of the board. So we work closely with that board. In some of your states, that's a commission. And then we work with our legislature and sponsor bills. We sponsored several bills over the last few years that laid the groundwork for the state accountability framework and the sort of next generation of assessments and supports and continuous improvement. So again, that's work that I know a lot of you do typically in terms of advocacy. In this case, it's been pretty laser focused on ESSA and the issues related to ESSA. One thing I would just point out is Chris said that ESSA was different than NCLB in that it has at least the potential to re-empower states in terms of thinking what's best for them and how they want to approach education. And one of the things that I found fascinating is most of us get about 90% of our funding for education from our own coffers, from state coffers or local coffers, and the federal government contributes on average around 10%. And yet we gave them way more power than what 10% should have bought. Under NCLB and sometimes Race to the Top, the federal hand had an outsized influence on what a state did. And one of the things we've been trying to do in our state is just really think about leadership and not compliance. Let's not just comply with the federal government. Let's think about what we want for our kids and our economy. And so that's one thing we have done a lot of, and I would encourage you to think about is help your state leaders assert themselves and have a point of view and push back, because we pushed back quite a bit, frankly, on certain elements of the federal government that we thought were overreaches and frankly been very successful at it. So I think ESSA provides an opportunity for leadership from all levels, from the business sectors like business community and others, but also regional, state, and national. And we all need to do this together. I'm not being critical of the federal government as much as we all ought to be partners, which is what we asked of the federal government, be our partner, not our cop. So advocacy. So the next thing is we spend a lot of time like some of you have on this career readiness question and trying to, just as Baton Rouge did, try to make sure that there is a really robust definition of career readiness, and that in some ways the highest form, as Chris said, of career readiness is college readiness, and college readiness is career readiness, so fusing those better together. So the business community is the strongest voice in this area. You have obvious credibility, but often we just don't show up. For all sorts of reasons, we're busy, and it just doesn't feel like it's worth our time or it will make a difference. And what I've been really gratified with is as we do show up more and more, we are welcomed. You know, as I asked Chris earlier, how do folks respond in the educational community when we show up? Now, we show up as partners. We don't show up as sort of provocateurs that look to embarrass the education community and shame them into doing better. We show up with the idea that, you know, we need to support public education. We get that you're important. We do have a point of view, and we expect to be heard, and we want to work together with you. And what I've been amazed with is when we just change that subtle voice from we have expectations and we have a voice we expect to be heard, but we also get that you should be respected and you have a role and a job to do, it just changes it tremendously. So my staff, myself and my staff are very welcomed in the halls of our educational kind of leadership in California, to the point where we have a group that we've organized. We call it our North Star group. And it's the president of the State Board of Education, which is the governor's highest advisor for all things in education in California, the state superintendent, and then two of their top staff members, myself and a woman named Linda Darling Hammond that some of you might have heard of, one of the best researchers in the world on education. And the six of us meet 2 or 3 times a year, and we really have a chance then to chart kind of the overall strategy of California. And that's what's led in California to a tremendous alignment between the point of view of California's business community and the point of view of educators and other major stakeholders, and ultimately a shared policy vision that we call the California Way. And then finally, at a local level, for some of you, I think your biggest play, you've told us, will be how does this impact our school districts in our own region? And it will tremendously. It just happens in almost like a slow motion effort. It's like watching a slow motion train wreck, I think, in some ways. Don't let it be one. But because as these state plans happen, as Chris laid out, once a state plan is finalized, then it will require all local school districts in every state to have their own ESSA plan. And that's where you also can all step up and help your local school district or districts put together a thoughtful plan. And they'll have some flexibility, and you want to, again, infuse that plan with a career readiness approach that's insightful and doable, and build the business partnerships and internships and other things you can do, only you can do really, to help make whatever they're going to do come to life and be effective. So in our case, we have something called the LA Compact that some of you might have heard of. They got all of the major partners in Los Angeles to sign up to a shared set of goals and measures and strategies, and we baked into it this kind of definition of career readiness that's been discussed, and a commitment to implement it that way. So that's a local play that we do, along with lots of other things that are similar to what some of you have done, of just actively working with schools. So that gives you kind of a super high level of some of the stuff we're up to. So let me, again, try to encourage some of you to share out what are some of the things that you're doing as it relates to ESSA, or that you'd like to do, and you want some help or want to bounce some questions or ideas off us. And what else another thing you can share with us too is what can we do for you, we, ACCE EAD, and some of us as members, peers, what help can we bring to you for you to feel you have the help you need to be able to get engagement with ESSA in your state, in your region?
And at this time, you're welcome to raise your hand or submit a question into the tool, into your toolbar. And Dexter, I see that you have raised your hand. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now. Go ahead and speak.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dexter Freeman with the Irving Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce. I'm our Director of Education here, and I'll share one thing that we've been doing that we're pretty proud of, and that's a capital campaign focused on education, a programmatic capital campaign focused on education. It was actually launched in 2012, 5 years, and so we're starting our final year here in 2016. It'll wrap up next September in 2017, and it was really focused on a couple of things. One was more so like a branding or an image campaign to really change the perception that a lot of people had about our educational opportunities and really the quality of our education here in the city. And so we wanted to change the mindset that a lot of people had, and through that we focused on STEM and AVID programming. And so it's been very successful. $3.1 million was the goal. We're about at 2.7, 2.8 right now, as we approach the finish line. And so we just put out our annual report, and one thing that's we're pretty proud of right now. And even with that, we've been able to really engage stakeholders. And if they can't give money, we really want them to give time and really be engaged in education. So we've been able to engage stakeholders to even adopt schools where it makes sense and where some of the initiatives align with the organization and also aligning with what the schools wanted to do in our community. And so that was also spurred by our chairman, our immediate past chairman of our board of directors, who really had a heart for education. And so that was really the charge to our business community here in the Irving Las Colinas community in Texas.
Thank you, Dexter. We appreciate you sharing that information. We got another question from Renata Robinson, who asked, will there be any consistent standards required across the nation for data comparison needs? Would one of our speakers like to take that question?
Let me start with it. Chris, feel free to weigh in. As most of you know, a Common Core was rolled out over the last several years. A lot of states adopted it, some states didn't, but even some of the states that didn't adopted something similar, versions of it. That was one of the points of Common Core, is to have standards, high standards across the country. I think that what we're trying to do is move toward an era where all the standards are high across the country, but they're not exactly the same. Because I think the elusive problem is, if you say the standards should be exactly the same when you have different economies and different communities across the country, you can end up with almost a race to the bottom instead of what we hoped was a race to the top. Because education will tend to homogenize these things, and next thing you know, you get something that creates comparability, but we're actually drawing the performance down. So I think there will be greater variability, but I think all boats can rise if we do this well. Chris, how would you answer that question?
David, I might take it up 30,000 feet and say that I think it's an excellent question. I think that to the extent that people really design the same skill set in terms of the soft skills or the essential skills work in assessment and accountability, you're going to have comparable data sets across the career readiness and college readiness indicators, especially places that might be willing to go a little further than, let's say, John White is willing to go in Louisiana, where they're going to bake that into their accountability system. I think there's also opportunities, like I mentioned Kentucky earlier. They've created I think the Kentucky Occupational Student Skills Assessment. So there, across all their districts, they're having comparable data sets, right? So you're either going to take work keys or you're going to take their occupational skills test. Those things are interchangeable, though those data sets become something that administrators can use, that universities trying to compare district to district could use. And I think across states, you can even see work keys, ACT's work keys program, or some of the common measures that come from multi-state programs like ConnectEd, the linked learning initiative that started in California and is moving forward. So while I agree with you, I don't think it's going to be a uniform thing. I think there'll be the same kind of goals called different things and measured in different ways in states. We have a nascent movement for comparable data.
If I might jump in too, I think that that is absolutely true, and I think that what you're seeing is organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, like the National Governors Association, putting together their thoughts on, for instance, what high-quality work-based learning looks like, and then you'll see that type of model adopted throughout states and regions that'll give us some sort of standardization.
And Liz, I don't know if you would agree with this, but it does seem to me likely over time, as states choose to go with micro-credentialing as the transferable item for kids that proves that they have those skills, industry certificates could get less local or regional and be more national in terms of what the component micro-credentials are. And I think that over time we could enter a period where those micro-credentials become things that surface on industry platforms at the national level and are transferable and more data alike that way. But I don't know if you think that that's a bit of a pipe dream or you're starting to see some of that.
No, I think we are seeing that. I think that even though our industry-based credentials are aligned to regional needs, they are by and large nationally recognized because you do want kids to have portability. Certainly you want them to be able to make an impact in your state where there are needs for workers, but you also don't want to limit them so that they can't ever leave and be employable.
Yes, thank you, Liz and Chris and David. I think we have time for a 30-second comment. Mary, I see that you've raised your hand, so I'll go ahead and unmute you. Mary, go ahead. Mary Bontrager, would you like to share a 30-second comment before we end the webinar?
Can you hear me now, Anya?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I had my phone on mute. Just quickly, our Department of Education has really been great in reaching out to organizations such as the Greater Des Moines Partnership and involving us in things like their CTE task force. 2 years ago, they formed the Competency-Based Education Collaborative, which is focused on career pathways to college, career, and life-ready graduates. And from that, a stakeholder group was convened to really define Iowa's definition of college and career ready, which was actually our recommendation. It's been about a little over a year and a half coming up with the definition that was then vetted out and tested across the state. And our definition was adopted by the Department of Ed this August. So if anyone's interested in that, what our definition is, I could quickly read it, but you can go to the Iowa Department of Ed site.
That's fantastic. Thank you, and congratulations, Mary. Thank you for sharing that information. If anybody's interested in learning more about Mary's work, you can also feel free to connect with me. My email is listed on the screen in front of you, and I can connect you with Mary or any of your peers that have shared information about their work during today's presentation. Quickly before we hop off the line, I just want to share that we have updated and created a new K-12 Chamberpedia policy page, and on that page you will find examples of how chambers are engaging in this work, as well as additional resources related to ESSA. With that being said, I'd like to thank you all for joining today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I'd be happy to connect you with any of your peers or schedule a consultation with one of our Education Attainment Division consultants. Thank you.